That morning she threw my wedding ring onto the train tracks and said she was done waiting for a man who'd already stopped existing. The crowd pretended not to hear, but silence is louder when it's public. And just as the train pulled in, a blind man beside me whispered, "Pretend to be my son. If you want to survive what she just killed." I didn't remember the sound of my name when she said it that last time. It wasn't John anymore. It was failure, dressed up as man she once loved. We'd been married 30 years. 30 years of quiet dinners, polite distance, and her eyes slowly drifting toward the things I could no longer give: excitement, risk, maybe even relevance. But that morning, under the cracked roof of the old train station, she decided to make the end official. She said she couldn't do it privately because, in her words, "You've made everything invisible, including me." Then she opened my wallet, took half the cash, and handed the rest back, like a tip for services no longer required. I didn't fight her, because deep down, I'd already stopped being her husband long before she stopped pretending to be my wife. The crowd watched. That's the thing about humiliation. It's magnetic. People can't help but look. They hide behind phones, sunglasses, or pity. But the truth is, everyone loves a public ending. When the train arrived, she turned to me, one last cruelty left to give. "Go home, John. I'll send for the rest of your things, what's left of them." And then she stepped onto the train. The doors closed, and the sound of metal swallowing her became the last thing tying me to the life I used to know. I stood there with my suitcase, a few old shirts, and a ring that still glinted under the dirty skylight. For the first time in my life, I realized silence could bruise. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes after peace. It was the silence that stays after dignity has left. That's when I heard the voice. Low, calm, measured. "You shouldn't pick that up, son. Let the ring go." I turned. An older man sat 2 benches away. His suit was too fine for this place, his shoes polished like they'd never known dust. Dark glasses hid his eyes, but his head tilted precisely toward me, as if he could see everything without sight. "You dropped something," I muttered, unsure why I was even answering. "No," he said, "you did, but I'd suggest you leave it there." He smiled faintly, then tapped the cane beside him. "You see, when something rolls away from you, it's usually because it's done serving its purpose." I didn't know what to say. Maybe it was the calm in his tone, or the absurdity of being lectured by a blind man about direction, but for some reason, I listened. "Do you have anywhere to go?" he asked. I hesitated. "Home." "No," he said, "I meant somewhere real." He stood slowly adjusting his tie with practiced elegance and motioned toward the curb. A sleek black SUV idled there, the kind of vehicle that looked allergic to public parking lots. "My driver will take us somewhere quiet," he said. "But first I need you to do something." "What?" He leaned close enough that I could smell the faint scent of cedar on his jacket. "Pretend to be my son." I blinked. "Excuse me, just for a few hours. No questions, no lies, only silence. You look like someone who's just lost everything. That makes you perfect." Before I could protest, his driver, a tall man in a dark coat, approached. "Mr. Sterling, the car's ready." That name. It rang a faint bell. Frank Sterling. Real estate magnate. Rumored philanthropist. Blind since his late 60s after a crash that killed his wife. A man worth billions, yet unseen by the world he'd built. He turned toward me again, as if reading my silence. "You can say no, Miss Miller," I replied softly. "John Miller?" Ah, he smiled. "Good. You even sound reliable." I should have walked away. Everything about it felt unreal. The timing, the voice, the strange precision of his presence. But there was something in his tone. Not authority, but clarity. The kind of clarity you hear only from people who've already outlived their own mistakes. As the SUV door opened, I glanced once more at the ring still lying near the tracks. It caught the reflection of the morning light, a tiny piece of my past refusing to dim. I left it there. And when the doors are shut behind me, I didn't know it yet, but that was the exact moment my wife lost me forever, and another man started teaching me how to see. The car ride felt longer than the road itself. Frank Sterling sat beside me, hands resting on his cane, his head slightly tilted toward the hum of the city fading behind us. He didn't speak much, and I didn't ask where we were going. There are moments in life when curiosity feels heavier than silence. This was one of them. I looked at him again. He had the posture of someone who once commanded entire rooms, and the stillness of someone who'd already lost everything that mattered. The scent of cedar clung to his coat. His jawline was clean, but tired, like a man who'd shaved for discipline, not vanity. "You think I'm insane, don't you?" he asked suddenly. I hesitated. "I think you're unusually calm for a man picking strangers at train stations." He chuckled softly. "Calm is cheaper than therapy, son." That word son landed strangely. I wanted to correct him, to remind him that this was all some strange social experiment, but I didn't. There was something deliberate in his tone, as though he was testing how far I'd go before rejecting the word. The SUV turned off the main road and glided through iron gates taller than any I'd ever seen. Behind them stretched a world built from silence and wealth, manicured lawns, a fountain that didn't bother to make sound, marble columns washed in fading sunlight. When the car stopped, a man in a dark suit opened my door. "Welcome home, Mr. Sterling," he said, then looked at me and paused. "And welcome back, sir." Frank nodded, then whispered low enough that only I could hear. "They've been told my son returned early. Keep your answers short. In this house, truth is currency, and everyone's broke." He walked ahead of me slowly, his cane tapping the stone path in perfect rhythm. Inside, the air smelled of polish and old secrets. The walls were lined with portraits, not of family, but of himself. The younger, sighted version, smiling beside people who were now probably rich enough to forget his name. In the dining hall, a woman about my age approached, sharply dressed, cold eyes, voice like glass. "Mr. Sterling," she said, "you didn't mention he was coming today." Frank's lips curved faintly. "I like surprises, Rebecca. Keeps the heart beating." She turned to me. "So, this is your son?" "He is what I say he is," Frank replied with that same calm defiance. Her eyes narrowed. "Then welcome, Mr. Sterling Jr., I suppose." She left before I could speak. When the doors closed, I exhaled. "You're enjoying this," I muttered. He smiled. "Enjoyment is a strong word. I prefer clarity. I told you you were perfect for the role. They needed to see a man return who wasn't after anything. You have that face, John, the kind that looks like it's already lost everything worth stealing." The sentence hit deeper than I wanted to admit. Dinner was quiet. Every fork, every glass moved with the precision of people who'd practiced silence. Frank ate slowly, almost meditatively. At one point, he raised his head. "You're wondering why I chose you." I didn't answer. He didn't need me to. "I've been blind for 9 years," he said. "But I've only stopped seeing people recently. When you lose sight, you learn sound footsteps, tone breathing. You learn who's pretending to love you and who's just counting the seconds until you die. The world stopped visiting when my money became untouchable. Except today, I met someone who wasn't trying to be seen." He turned slightly toward me. "You looked like you were done being witnessed." I swallowed. You think that's a good thing?" "No," he said softly. "But it makes you honest." The butler entered, handed him a folder, then left. Frank slid it across the table toward me. Inside were photographs, blurred images of people I didn't know, a few financial documents, and a letter signed with his name. "You'll stay here for a while," he said. "Officially, you're my son. Unofficially, you're my mirror. I want to see who visits me now that they think I'm dying. And if I say no," he smiled again faintly, "then you'll go back to a station where no one waits for you, and you'll wonder for the rest of your life what I was trying to show you." The clock in the hall struck 9. The echo lingered longer than time should allow. I folded the letter, unsure whether I was stepping into kindness or a trap, maybe both. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll play your son." Frank nodded, satisfied. "Good. But remember, John, roles have a way of becoming real when no one's watching." And for a brief second, though he couldn't see me, I swore he smiled, as if he already knew how this story would end. The next morning, the air in the mansion felt rehearsed, like silence was something everyone had to practice. I woke to the sound of distant footsteps, deliberate and soft, moving across marble, like a secret trying not to echo. Frank was already awake, sitting near the window, even though he couldn't see the dawn. He held a cup of black coffee perfectly still. "They'll be here soon," he said without turning. "Who?" I asked. "Family. The kind that only visits when inheritance is mentioned." He said it casually, but his jaw tightened around the last word. I took a seat across from him. He didn't need to look. He always seemed to know where I was, like he could hear the shape of my silence. Do they know about me? Not yet, but they'll pretend they did. It's what families do when money enters the room. I smiled faintly, unsure whether to admire or pity him. The man who owned half the city couldn't trust his own blood, and the stranger he picked at a train station was now his closest confidant. Around 9, a black sedan pulled into the courtyard. The butler, Thomas, opened the door. 2 people stepped out, a woman in her 30s, with precision in her walk, and a man a few years older who looked like a lawyer, even when he wasn't talking. Frank turned his head slightly. That'll be Claire and Anthony, my niece, and her husband. They love me deeply. Whenever I'm dying, he gestured toward the hall. You'll greet them as my son. Calm, polite, minimal words. They'll look for weakness, don't give them any. I hesitated. What if they ask who I am? Then tell them what they already suspect, that I'm a lonely old man. And you're what loneliness looks like when it finds purpose. The doors opened. Claire's voice filled the room like perfume, sweet but engineered. Uncle Frank, you look wonderful. I was so worried when I heard about your condition. She stopped when she saw me. Her smile froze. And who's this? Frank didn't move. You tell her, John. I looked at her and forced a calm smile. I'm his son. The silence afterward was so sharp, you could almost hear it breathe. Anthony's brows lifted. Son, that's new. Frank nodded slowly. Life surprises us when we think we've seen everything, doesn't it? They exchanged glances, the kind people make when deciding whether a lie is worth challenging. As they sat, Claire's tone changed. How long have you known each other? Long enough, Frank replied, to know who's still family when blood isn't watching. Her eyes flicked toward me again, measuring Slasuning. Interesting. I never knew you had another child. Most people don't know what I've lost either, he said softly. We keep what matters quiet. For a man without sight, he hit every target dead center. They stayed for an hour, pretending probing, circling the conversation, like vultures around an animal that refused to die. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. My silence unsettled them more than words could. When they finally left, the air seemed lighter. Frank exhaled slowly. You did well. Silence is the loudest truth in this house. I nodded, still uneasy. Why test them like this? Why me? He smiled faintly. Because honesty is too rare to find on purpose. I wanted to see who'd notice a stranger in my chair before noticing the chair itself. I didn't answer. But as the car drove away, I caught sight of Claire glancing back at the mansion, her face stiff with calculation. Something told me this wouldn't be the last time I saw her. That evening, while Frank rested, Thomas approached quietly. Mr. Miller, he whispered, a letter arrived this morning, addressed to you, but with no return name. He handed it over and left without another word. The envelope was ivory sealed with red wax, and the handwriting was delicate, deliberate. Inside, only one line. You're not the first man he's called son. The last one disappeared. My hand went cold. For the first time since that morning at the train station, I wasn't sure if I'd stepped into mercy or into something much darker. You're not the first man he's called son. The last one disappeared. I kept the letter in my pocket for most of the day, as if holding it close would stop the words from being true. Frank didn't mention it. He spent the morning in his study, dictating letters to Thomas, calm as ever, the kind of calm that hides storms behind locked doors. I tried to tell myself it was nothing. A trick, a test, another layer in whatever game he was playing. But the handwriting haunted me. Neat, delicate, feminine. Someone who knew him well enough to know where I was, yet careful enough not to sign their name. At lunch, I found Frank sitting in the conservatory, the sunlight cutting across his face in pale lines. He looked like a man painted by his own memories. "You've quashed today," he said without looking. "You ever get letters that don't belong to you?" He smiled faintly. "At my age, everything belongs to someone else eventually." This one had no name. He lifted his head slightly. "Then it was meant for you, not me." His calm unnerved me. The kind of calm that either knows too much or nothing at all. I wanted to ask about the last man who'd played my role, but the question felt heavier than the truth could carry. That night I couldn't sleep. The mansion felt different. After dark, too clean, too symmetrical. The kind of place that pretends to rest. I wandered through the halls until I found myself outside a locked door near the east wing. The brass handle was polished, but the dust around it was untouched. "That room's been sealed for years," a voice said behind me. Thomas stood there quiet as ever, a tray of tea balanced in his hands. "Why?" I asked. "Because Mr. Sterling prefers ghosts that don't move." He set the tray down and looked at me carefully. "You should be careful, Mr. Miller. This house listens, and it remembers." I waited until he left, then tried the handle. Locked, but not impossible. Inside my pocket, the key ring Frank had given me when I first arrived felt suddenly heavier. I tried one. It fit. The door opened with a sigh. The room smelled of wood oil and paper and something else, something like dusted grief. A single chair sat in the center, facing a wall of photographs. I stepped closer. There he was, a younger man, early 40s maybe, clean cut, standing beside Frank in photo after photo at charity galas, award ceremonies, even family dinners. Every image had been framed perfectly, except the last one. That one was cracked. On the back of the frame, a date May 14th, 2017. And beneath it a word written in pencil, Elias. So that was him, the one before me. I searched the desk beside the photos. Drawers filled with documents, adoption paperwork, unsigned wills, medical reports, and at the bottom a letter. I hesitated, then unfolded it. "Frank, you promised me truth. Instead, you taught me silence. I can't pretend to be your son anymore. Whatever you're hiding, I hope it dies with you." There was no signature, only a small, faint fingerprint at the corner smudged with something dark that looked too old to identify. The floor creaked. I turned. Frank stood in the doorway. No cane, no guide, just him, still almost spectral. "That room isn't for you," he said quietly. I froze. You said honesty was currency. It is, he replied, stepping closer. But even truth has interest rates. Some debts are better left unpaid. I set the letter down careful, not to sound defensive. Who was Elias? He smiled without warmth. A man who forgot the difference between truth and performance. And where is he now? Gone, Frank said simply. The way all masks disappear once they start believing their faces. He reached for the wall, fingers brushing the cracked frame. I told you, John. Roles have a way of becoming real when no one's watching. Elias believed his too deeply. Don't make the same mistake. Then he turned and left, closing the door with a softness that sounded like a warning. I stood there for a long time, surrounded by someone else's life, feeling the faint vibration of the house, settling back into silence. And in that silence, one thought kept echoing. If I was the second man he called son, how many had there been before the first? The next day I walked through the house with a different kind of silence, not the kind that came from peace, but the kind that hid questions. Elias's name still echoed in my head, like a word too heavy to say out loud. Frank didn't mention the room, or the letter, or the man who disappeared. He just went about his routine tea at dawn, music at noon, a slow walk by the garden at dusk. Everything seemed normal, and that made it worse. Sometimes the most frightening thing isn't what's kid, it's what's rehearsed. That night I sat in the library, trying to read, but the air felt wrong. The chandelier flickered once, twice. Then I heard it a sound behind the walls. A faint, mechanical click, followed by a low, static hum. Not pipes, not the wind, something man-made. I pressed my ear against the wood paneling. There it was again, a faint voice, distorted as if buried under layers of distance. I couldn't make out the words, but it was human. I followed the sound down the hallway toward Frank's study. Each step tightened the air around me until even my breathing felt intrusive. Behind one of the portraits, the one of Frank's late wife, I found a small metal grid, no larger than a matchbox, a hidden microphone. Before I could react, Thomas's reflection appeared in the glass of the opposite frame. Curiosity, he said quietly, is what killed the last one. I turned. You mean Elias? He didn't answer, just stared at me the way people look at an open wound, not out of judgment, but out of inevitability. Why would Frank hide microphones in his own house, I asked. He doesn't hide them, Thomas replied. He collects them. I frowned. Collects. He likes to hear the truth when people think he can't see it. Then Thomas walked away, leaving that single sentence to hang in the air like smoke. I waited until he was gone, then unscrewed the grid. Inside a small recorder, decades old, but still blinking with a faint red light. I pressed play. Static. Then a voice. You promised me, Frank. No more lies. Elias. The sound was muffled, but the anger was alive, still raw. I know what's in the basement. I know why you chose me. You think blindness is an excuse for cruelty? The rest cut off, replaced by silence. And then another voice, Frank's calm, steady. Some people cannot handle what they see, Elias. That's why I take sight away from them. The tape ended with a faint thud, like something falling. Or someone. I stood there for a long time, the device still warm in my hands. The words replayed in my head until they no longer sounded like voices, but echoes of a confession meant to be found. When I saw Frank the next morning, he was sitting by the fireplace, hands folded neatly on his cane. He smiled the moment I entered, as though he'd been waiting. "You didn't sleep again," he said. "No. That means you found something." His tone was gentle, too gentle. "You listen to everything, don't you?" I said. "Not everything. Only what people hide from themselves." "Why were you recording Elias?" "Because truth doesn't repeat itself," he answered. "You either capture it or you lose it." "And what happened to him?" "He walked into the dark and never came back." Frank leaned back slightly as if that sentence had ended a conversation only he understood. "You're afraid now," he said. "I'm wondering if I should be." He smiled. "Good. Fear is honesty without pride. You'll need it before this is over." I wanted to say something, anything that made sense of what I'd heard, but words felt useless against a man who could hear the shape of every lie before it formed. When I left the study, the recorder was gone from my pocket. I hadn't dropped it. I hadn't left it anywhere. It had simply vanished, as if the house had taken it back. And that night, as I lay in the dark, I could swear I heard the same static hum again. Only this time, it was inside my room, inside the walls, listening back. By the third night, I stopped, pretending to sleep. The sound behind the walls had grown louder, no longer a whisper, but a steady pulse like a machine remembering how to breathe. I got up careful not to wake the house. Even silence had weight here. The corridors were dim, the portrait staring at nothing. Every light I passed flickered once, as if the mansion itself was blinking. In the kitchen, I found Thomas pouring whiskey into a glass. He didn't look surprised to see me. "You hear it too," he said. "You mean the humming?" "I mean the memory," he replied. "This place never forgets what's been said within its walls." He slid the glass toward me. "Drink. It helps dull the echoes." I didn't touch it. "Where's the basement?" I asked. Thomas looked at me the way someone looks at a man who's already chosen his fate. "It's where Mr. Sterling keeps what he can't let go of, like Elias." He hesitated. "Go to sleep, Mr. Miller." I tried that. The house wouldn't let me. He didn't argue. He just sighed and placed a small brass key on the counter. "If you go down there, don't turn on the main light. It reacts to sound." I took the key and left before he could stop me. The entrance to the basement was hidden behind a panel in the east hallway. The lock clicked softly, and a stale breath of cold air drifted out, damp, metallic, unfinished. The stairs creaked as I descended. Halfway down, I saw a faint light, trembling at the bottom. Not white, but blue, like the color of electricity, trying to remember warmth. When I reached the floor, I froze. Rows of old tape recorders lined the walls, dozens of them, some blinking, some silent. The shelves were labeled by year, 2015, 2016, and then a single unlabeled section. I pressed play on the nearest one. "Don't do this." "Frank," a man's voice pleaded. "You said it was about truth. This isn't truth. It's control." "Elias," his voice again. Then another recording beside it started on its own. Frank's voice, this time, calm, unbroken. "Control and truth are the same thing, Elias. One just hurts longer." Static swallowed the rest. I turned around and noticed something. At the far end of the room, a door made of steel with scratches near the handle. The key Thomas gave me trembled in my hand. It fit. The door opened to a small soundproof chamber. Inside, a single chair faced a wall lined with speakers. On the table lay a pair of headphones, a microphone, and a reel labeled John, my name. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The reel wasn't old. It looked new, untouched. "Don't!" I spun around. Frank stood in the doorway, cane in hand, eyes clouded but expression sharp. He didn't need sight to look right through me. "What is this place?" I asked. "Memory," he said softly. "Mine? Theirs? Yours? You recorded me." "Not yet," he replied, "but I will." "Why?" "Because you're here for the same reason Elias was, to confess something you haven't said aloud yet." "I don't have anything to confess." "Everyone does," he said. "Some just don't know it until they hear it played back." He walked toward the table, his cane tracing the floor like a metronome of patience. "You came into this house pretending to be someone you're not. The question is, how long before the pretending becomes the truth?" I felt the air tighten. The hum from the machines deepened, pulsing with my heartbeat. "You think I'm lying?" I said quietly. "No," he answered. "I think you're still deciding what kind of lie you wanted to live in." He turned his hand, brushing against the reel, marked with my name. "When you're ready, John, you'll play it yourself. That's how all of this ends." Then he left, taking the only light with him. I stood there in the dark, surrounded by hundreds of silent voices, some pleading, some breaking, all trapped inside their own truths. And for the first time, I wasn't sure whether I had come here to expose Frank Sterling or to finally listen to myself. I didn't sleep that night. The word confess stayed with me like a fever. What did he think I'd done? What did he think I was hiding? By morning, I found Frank in his usual spot near the window, the one that faced nothing but light. He was listening to an old jazz record, the kind where the trumpet sounded like it remembered pain. "You were in the basement," he said. He didn't ask. He knew. "You wanted me to find it," I replied. "If I wanted that," he said, "I'd have left the light on." He smiled faintly, as if amused by my defiance. "But you're not angry. You're afraid. That's better." Do you enjoy fear, don't you?" "No," he said, "I enjoy honesty. They often sound the same." I sat across from him. Who were all those voices? People who thought truth could save them. And did it? He tilted his head, listening to something only he could hear. "It depends on who was listening. He turned off the record player, and the silence after the music felt surgical. Elias thought truth was a mirror, he said. He wanted to look at himself and see forgiveness, but forgiveness isn't reflection, John. It's blindness, the kind you choose. His words unsettled me more than any scream could have. What happened to him? He ran away from the only thing he couldn't escape, his own voice. I wanted to ask more, but something in his tone warned me not to. That afternoon I walked through the garden to clear my head. The roses were dying petals, curling into themselves, as if trying to remember warmth. I sat near the fountain, the one that never made sound, and thought about the reel marked with my name. Why would he record me? What could he possibly want to hear? When I returned inside, the reel was on my bed. No note, no explanation, just waiting. I carried it downstairs to the study, where the old tape deck still hummed faintly. My hands shook as I pressed play. At first static, then a voice. My voice. I told her I'd only be gone for a few days. I wanted to see if she'd even notice. But when I came back, her car was parked outside room 214. The words echoed like ghosts of a story I'd tried to bury. It wasn't just memory. It was the night my marriage ended. How did he have this? She opened the door. My voice continued. And the man behind her didn't look surprised. He looked expected. The reel clicked to a stop. I felt sick. Frank had recorded my past, the one I hadn't told anyone. The one that had led me to that train station alone, broken, pretending I still had somewhere to go. When I turned, he was standing in the doorway, his face calm but unreadable. You followed me, I said. I found you, he corrected. You used my pain as some kind of experiment. No, I used it as proof. Of what? That guilt makes better sons than blood ever could. I took a step toward him. You're sick. He laughed softly. So was every man who ever wanted truth. You came here because you wanted to know if you could still be forgiven. I just gave you the stage. And Elias, he wanted the same thing, but he wasn't ready for silence. And you think I am? You're still here, aren't you? He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. You can walk away any time, John. But if you stay one more night, you'll hear what he left for you. Elias. The last thing he said before he disappeared. He smiled faintly. It's still in the walls, and it's been waiting for you. Then he was gone, cane tapping rhythmically against the floor. Each step a countdown to something I didn't understand. I sat alone in that vast room, the tape still spinning, in the silence, whispering the words I'd once sworn I'd never say again. And somewhere deep inside the walls, I thought I heard another tape click on. Then a familiar voice, not Frank's, not mine, began to speak. The house breathed differently that night. Every sound seemed deliberate. The groan of wood, the soft click of unseen switches, the faint vibration behind the wallpaper. It was as if the mansion had decided to start remembering out loud. I followed the hum back to the study. The recorder on the table blinked once, though I hadn't touched it. Then a voice came through the walls. If you're hearing this, it means he's chosen you too. I froze. It wasn't Frank, it was Elias. His tone carried the weight of a man who'd already accepted something irreversible. He finds people who are breaking quietly, the voice said. Men like you. Men who mistake guilt for redemption. He reckoned you because he believes confession keeps him alive. The static between sentences was uneven, almost breathing. Don't tell him you heard this, Elias continued. He'll say you imagined it. He said that to me too, before he made me record my own apology. I looked around the room, half expecting Frank to appear in the doorway again. But only the walls spoke. He'll ask what you regret most. And when you answer, he'll keep you here until that regret sounds perfect. Then silence. And just as I reached to turn off the machine, another voice. Not Elias, not Frank, mine. I told her. I forgave her. The sound was faint, but it was me, my voice broken by hesitation. But I didn't. I never did. The reel kept spinning, though I never remembered saying those words. I pulled the plug from the wall, but the voice kept playing, echoing from inside the floorboards, the ceiling, the air itself. Then from the hallway, I heard the slow, steady tap of a cane. You shouldn't be down here this late, Frank said, stepping into the doorway. You lied to me. I told you the truth you were ready to hear. You recorded me again. No, he said softly. You recorded yourself. He walked forward until he stood beside the table, his face calm, his blindness like a crown of silence. Do you know why you came to that station, John? Because my wife left me. No, he said. Because you couldn't forgive her or yourself. You wanted someone to tell you what your pain meant. That's what I do. You manipulate people into believing you're saving them. I don't save anyone, he said, voice low. I give them an ending. An ending? To what? The noise. He reached for the tape deck and pressed a button I hadn't seen before. The lights dimmed, and a new recording began, a blend of overlapping voices, one bleeding into another, cries, whispers, apologies. And beneath them all, Frank's calm tone. Say it until it stops hurting. The room seemed to close in on itself. I could hear Elias, again louder this time. He won't let you go until you say it right. Turn it off, I said. You're almost there, Frank replied. Say it, John. What did you really feel when she walked away? Stop. Say it. The noise swelled my own voice, looping back each confession louder than the last. Say it, John. I hated her. The words ripped out before I could stop them. And for a moment, everything went silent. The tapes stopped spinning. The static vanished. Even the hum inside the walls went still. Frank stood motionless, his hand resting on the cane. Then he nodded once, almost kindly. There it is, he said. The truth always sounds ugly before it becomes real. He turned to leave his shadow, stretching across the room like a closing door. What now? I asked quietly. Now, he said, you decide whether forgiveness is worth hearing again. When he was gone, the silence didn't comfort me. It felt like punishment. I looked around the room, every recorder, every reel, every captured confession. And for the first time, I realized what he'd built wasn't a sanctuary for truth. It was a mausoleum for the living, a place where guilt could echo forever waiting for the next man foolish enough to listen. The morning after the confession, the house felt empty, like it had finally exhaled something it had been holding for too long. Frank didn't come down for breakfast. Thomas said he wasn't feeling well, but I could tell from his eye that it was more than that. The mansion was quieter than usual. No static, no humming, no whispers from the walls. Only the sound of wind pushing against the glass. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt free to walk without being listened to. But freedom, I learned, doesn't always feel like peace. Sometimes it just feels like absence. I went to the study, the room that had once been filled with voices, and found the tape deck still sitting there. One reel remained on the table. It was unlabeled. Beside it lay a note written in Frank's careful handwriting. Play this when the silence starts to feel heavier than guilt. I didn't want to, but I did. The tape clicked, and his voice filled the room. Calm, steady, tired. If you're hearing this, John, then I've already gone blind in more ways than one. He paused, as though listening to something only memory could hear. When sight leaves you, the world doesn't go dark. It just loses its lies. Faces become voices, and voices become weight. I started recording people because I thought I could capture truth. But all I ever caught were ghosts, echoes of the things no one had the courage to bury. His breath trembled slightly. Elias wanted to leave. I told him he could, but when he tried, he realized he'd already become part of the house. His voice still lives here because I couldn't let him vanish. I told myself it was mercy. It wasn't. I felt my throat tighten. The sound of his confession wasn't grand or dramatic. It was small, almost fragile, the way truth often is. You were different, John. You didn't come here for redemption. You came here because silence scared you. And maybe that's why I chose you. Because silence scares me too. He took a slow breath. When you hate someone you love, it doesn't end when they leave. It ends when you finally forgive the part of yourself that still waits for them to come back. He paused again. You think I helped you confess, but the truth is, I envied you. You still had something left to regret. I only had the echoes. The sound of the tape wavered, and for a moment I could hear him moving the faint tap of the cane, the creak of the chair. If this house ever goes silent again, it means it's finally heard enough. Don't stay, John. Leave before the walls start listening to you, too. Then nothing. No closing words, no goodbye, just silence. I turned off the recorder and sat there for a long time, staring at the empty reels. Through the window, the first snow of winter began to fall soft, unannounced, the kind of snow that doesn't blanket the world, but erases it gently. I went upstairs. The hallway to Frank's room was dim, the curtains drawn. The door was slightly open. He sat in his chair, still peaceful, one hand resting on his cane, the other on a small recorder in his lap. The light from the window touched his face, and for the first time, I saw no tension, No guarded calm. Just rest. Thomas stood in the corner silent. "When did it happen?" I asked. "Sometime before dawn," he said quietly. He asked me to play him the last recording before he slept. "Which one?" "Yours." I looked at the recorder in Frank's hand. The red light blinked once, then went still. There were no tears. Just a quiet understanding, the kind that doesn't ask for meaning. I left the room, walked through the halls one last time, and as I passed the east wing, I could still hear faint echoes, not of words, but of breathing, of life replaying itself for whoever dared to listen next. Outside, the cold hit me like truth, clean, cruel, necessary. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch from silence. I walked away from the house, each step lighter, until the sound of snow beneath my feet was the only confession left. I left the Sterling estate before the sun fully rose. The snow had deepened overnight, and the world looked suspended as if even time had been muted. The car, Thomas arranged, waited by the gates, engine running, but soundless under the blanket of white. Before I stepped aside, I turned one last time toward the mansion. Every window was dark, every curtain drawn. For a man who spent his life recording others, Frank Sterling had chosen to end his story in perfect silence. As the car moved through the long driveway, I could still see the outline of the house shrinking behind me. A structure built not of stone, but of secrets that finally ran out of voices. "Did he leave anything else for you?" the driver asked quietly. "No," I said, "just silence." I didn't look back again. There's something sacred about the final glance. It should only happen once. The ride to the station felt shorter this time, though I didn't speak a word. Every mile took me further from the echo, but closer to something I didn't expect: peace. When I arrived, the platform looked exactly as it had the day my wife left me there. The same worn benches, the same flickering light, the same air that smelled faintly of metal and rain. But something in me had changed. The emptiness didn't echo anymore. It just existed. I sat down on the same bed, resting my hands on my knees, listening. No announcements, no trains. Just the world, quietly remembering to breathe. A few minutes later, a woman sat 2 seats away, middle-aged, travel-worn eyes, red from crying. She held a small recorder in her lap, tracing its edge with her thumb. "Sorry," she said softly. "Do you know if the next train's coming?" "It always does," I replied. She smiled faintly. "You sound sure." "I wasn't," I said. "Until recently." She looked at the recorder, then at me. "My father used to make these," she whispered. "He said people are never really gone as long as someone listens." He was right. He died last week. I nodded. Then he probably just stopped speaking because he finally said enough. She smiled again. The kind of smile people make when they don't know whether to thank you or break down. When her train arrived, she stood, whispered thank you, and disappeared behind the sound of closing doors. and I sat there alone again only. This time it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like practice. For years I'd filled my life with noise arguments, promises, half-forgiven memories. I thought silence was what followed loss. But Frank taught me something else. Silence isn't what comes after truth. It's what makes truth stay. The snow began to fall harder, soft enough to cover the tracks, but not heavy enough to erase them. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and let the sound of nothing settle over me. In that stillness, I could almost hear Frank's voice, not as a ghost, but as understanding. Forgiveness isn't saying it's okay. It's realizing you can keep living even when it isn't. I opened my eyes. The platform was empty, the sky endless, the air cold but kind. I stood up, adjusted my coat, and began walking down the tracks. Not toward anyone, not away from anything, but into a silence I finally chose to carry. Because some truths don't need to be recorded. They just need to be heard once, and then left to rest.